So this happened about 12 years ago. My family owns a farm in the heart of an Indian reservation. One winter, I was home for Christmas, taking care of the farm while my parents were away Christmas shopping. As I was home by myself, way late in the night, and I hear all of our cows freaking out. I knew it had to be the wild dogs that are rampant in the area, so I throw on some boots, grab a shotgun, load it up, and head out to the field. This was a perfect scenario for a horror movie. It was cloudy, but there was a full moon, and it was breaking through the clouds just right to light up all the snow. I ran out into the middle of the field, and just in time I see two dogs. They were standing up facing each other and fighting. I think perfect 2 for 1. So I pump a shell into the chamber of my Mr. 12 gauge, and then it happened. The two dogs heard the rack, and they both stopped, looked over at me, and ran away. On their back legs. I immediately froze, and every ghost story about skinwalkers and all the other native legends I grew up with flew through my mind. Keep in mind, I'm just a white guy, and up until then, these were all just boogeyman stories the native kids like to tell us to scare us. That night, they became real. My uncle and cousin saw a large deer on the side of the road. When they got closer, it hopped over the fence like a bipedal man. One time, driving back from Gallup, my dad saw an old Navajo woman walking on the side of the road, and when he slowed to offer her a ride, she took off into the plains, quickly with inhuman speed. Once when I was a kid, my family was at my aunt's house, which is a rural, secluded area, when we were toyed with by a few different entities. They would make animal noises, and when we looked to the direction from which the noises were coming from, they would turn a flashlight on and off. The noises would come from all directions, and increasingly shorter succession. Usually when I'm there on the reservation visiting, alone, late at night, I will feel the presence of evil and dread. Panic and paranoia will wash over me, and as sudden as it comes, it leaves. My grandmother on my mother's side has always been very superstitious, for lack of a better word. She's not religious, but she does believe in a lot of paranormal stuff. Her mother was full-blooded Navajo, and her father was Irish. Either way, she had never been anywhere east of Montana, and she grew up in Nevada. One year, when I was in grade school, we went to visit her, and most of the visit was pretty uneventful. Typical boring old people stuff. Except she always kept her curtains drawn shut, and would always peek out the window when someone asked what she was doing. She would reply simply with, "Inaldlushi is watching me." This went on for nearly the entire visit until a few days before we were due to leave. My grandmother and then baby brother, who's 19 now, were in the front yard that evening, planting flowers when all of a sudden, she's yelling at my little brother to get away from the creature, that it's not safe. Of course, being in Nevada, we all assumed that my brother had found a scorpion or a rattlesnake. So we all ran outside to see my grandmother clutching my little brother and shaking in terror against the side of the house. Standing out in the yard was a large black Great Dane-sized dog. It was staring at my grandmother with an intensity I had never seen before. It looked up at us, gave a little huff, and bounded off. I don't remember if it moved unusually fast or not, but I do remember it had really deep yellow eyes. When my mother asked my grandmother what had happened, she kept repeating, "Inaldlushi has found me." She moved a couple weeks just after that. So, I had a nap this afternoon. Nothing new, but in the dream I was in a super weird rural place and I was walking around the corner of my garden, like between the wall of the house and the fence towards the front of my house. As I'm walking, a huge animal approaches me. It's so big and weird looking, I got absolutely terrified and froze up, hoping it would pass. It had a face that was similar to an anteater, a wide skull tapering into a thin, short snout, large, dark, slanted eyes very far apart from each other. You could see the curve of the skull and the detail of the bone of the nose. Like the bridge, I guess. It had sort of flat fur of dark brown. Its body was very thin and similar to a deer or antelope, except the curve of the ribcage was exaggerated, like a greyhound's. The legs were extremely long and ended in parted hoof-toe type feet. It did not have a tail. I felt terrified as I had no idea what the hell it was, and I remember in the dream I was mentally trying to come up with a description or an answer as to what it was. As it passed me in the narrow of a gap, it said hello, and I stared at it, feeling terrified. All of a sudden, it leaned up and stood up on its hind legs. I blinked and it was not a weird antelope-eating dog thing anymore, but instead a woman. An extremely tall woman. She had a slim average figure, brown hair, and was white. She must have been 10 feet tall. She told me she was really happy that I didn't run away from her, as most people are terrified and run away, especially if she speaks. I stood there dumbfounded and told her that I was actually terrified of her because I had never seen anything like her before, but now she had changed and I felt calm. She told me that she's so tall, she normally scares people anyway. She had some sort of injury and I can't remember what it was or how I fixed it, but I do remember fixing it. I don't know how we ended up meeting some other girl outdoors who wasn't some weird creature, just like a regular girl who was very tall, like 6 foot, and I could tell the other girl liked her, so I decided to leave them alone. I got followed by tall creature girl, and only realized upon looking up at the wall and seeing a hole in it and her looking back at me. She was really mad and seemed upset, and I wanted to know why I left her like that. Anyway, long story short, I ended up having a really weird, scary sex dream about me having sex in the woods with that creature girl, in her human state, and some other girls. There was lots of witchcraft in the sex too, and weird symbols in the air, like conscientiously wishing for stuff whilst having sex. It seemed the more I had sex with these girls, the more control I had over the world in my dreams, and I was making people do stuff just by thinking about it during the sex. There was also the appearance of a man who has previously really hurt me. He stood at the top of the path in the dark, watching me having sex. The dream was really scary, as most of the time I had no idea what the hell was going on or why I was having sex with all these girls. I was also afraid of the creature girl. Even during sex, I was scared of her. I only woke up from this stupidly long nap because my dog got on the bed with me and sat next to my face whining and pawing. Safe to say it shook me up, and now it's 4 a.m. and I don't want to sleep as I feel uneasy about what I might dream about. I've always had really weird, scary dreams, especially when my PTSD is severe, but I've never had a dream like that before, and the whole weird, creepy creature transforming into a girl who then seduces me theme got me really worried. It's like my subconscious went off and took acid last night whilst I was nodding off. Also, as an FYI, I'm a 24-year-old queer girl dating a bi dude, and I live in the UK. I'm basic Irish ethnicity. Nothing super interesting. I'm a pagan. My family are Catholic though, and I was raised Catholic. So it's not like having sex with girls is weird, it's just this specific incident felt so real. I had actually physical pleasure from the dream. Also, why did my brain decide to create a really scary animal hybrid? I'm not quite sure. Is it possible that a skinwalker or a wendigo seduced me and used my dreams to get into my life, or possibly attach itself to me? What do you think? I lived in Gallup, New Mexico over a decade ago as a teacher. Most of my students were Navajo, and some talked to me about skinwalkers. My personal experiences aren't that exciting. My roommate and I heard a weird scream gurgle outside of our house. We sent our male neighbors to investigate and they didn't find anything. We went to a haunted canyon. It had been closed the weekend before because of skinwalker activity in the area. Terrifying. My students mentioned having different ceremonies interrupted by skinwalkers howling and scratching at their doors. They also said I could go down to a certain lake at night and watch the skinwalkers come to drink. I am happy I never encountered one of these things during my time in New Mexico, but they really, really interest me, even though I want to stay as far away from them as I can. One of my daughters is going to turn 21 in December, and she would like to take a family trip to Colorado as her present. Some of you have read my experiences and know that I have not been off the East Coast since returning here to escape the skinwalker that was tormenting me. I never planned to go back to Arizona ever in my life. You couldn't pay me $7 million to do it. But since Colorado is near Arizona, and I never engaged in any kind of ceremony or ritual to break whatever bond it had to me, I can't help but wonder, could it still be waiting for me? It's been decades since my encounters, so realistically, I know it probably isn't out there, and I know that Colorado is a big place, but I'm still kind of nervous. My daughter does not want me to go if I feel afraid, but she seems really wanting to go to Colorado, and I wouldn't want to disappoint her, especially on her 21st birthday. Is there some kind of native ritual that they use to keep skinwalkers away? I hope this isn't offensive, and I don't want to make fun of anyone's culture. I have great respect for natives and just want to ease my mind for the trip. I 100% believe in skinwalkers, and if there is anything the natives use to keep them away, I will do it as respectfully as I can. I am not the kind of person to think every shadow, weird noise, or bump in the night is a monster, and I would never claim it to be a skinwalker unless I truly believe it to be one. I recently started researching skinwalkers as I'm a big horror fan, and body horror is what scares me the most. As I'm reading stories, I'm noticing scary parallels to what I saw as a child. I was in the woods outside my house with my dog, and each time I went in, I'd go in further, and this time was the furthest I'd ever gotten. I found a sort of broken down brick building. It was only big enough to be some kind of shed and only had 3 walls, which were really only about 4 feet tall. On the outside of the structure were a pile of deer skins, and on the inside were deer bones. It was a long time ago, so I could be wrong, but I specifically remember there being no meat. I booked it home and decided to not go back into the woods. At least not with it just being me and my dog. Later on in life, some of the local kids come up and ask me to go in the woods with them, because one had apparently saw something weird. So I tag along and we eventually make it pretty deep when we all see this creature crawling up a hill. I should clarify that the woods here are in a form of a V shape, with a creek running down the center. We were on one side of the V, and it was on the opposite. It looked like it could have been either a dog with very short white hair, like a greyhound, or a dog with no fur at all. It was super pale and quite lanky, and the joints where a normal dog should be were wrong. The hind legs looked normal, but its front legs bent more like a person dragging itself. It was having trouble climbing the hill as it was, and it looked like it kept sliding down from the dead leaves covering the ground. It was broad daylight, but we were all unanimously scared shitless and decided to book it back home. This was back when I was in middle school, and nothing has happened since. Then again, I also had never returned to the woods since. Now, mind you, the woods are by no means in the middle of nowhere. We were easily a 3-minute sprint away from a neighborhood no matter what direction we went. So it could have easily been a runaway dog, and fear made me think it was worse than it really was, but that's why I'd like to hear your opinion on what happened. So, a long while ago, me and a very close friend of mine got bored and decided to discover the nearby woods. We lived in a secluded area where we had a thick forest around us for miles, and frankly, the rural area was boring. We had no one from our age and no internet, so while we were sitting aimlessly, we decided to pack some stuff and wander into the woods. Now, my friend is a huge guy, mainly because he's obsessed with bodybuilding, so it was a bit hard for someone to scare him. But as we walked in, we both had an eerie feeling that we were being watched. The mood was tense, and strangely, the woods were dead silent. No birds chirping, no wind, and no sound of an animal or an insect. Not even a cricket. Approximately after 20 minutes of nothing but scaring ourselves, we heard a bark. And where I live, we have stray dogs, both in the streets and in wooded areas. And the ones that are in the wooded areas are not as friendly as the ones in the streets, because they are mainly really hungry. We stopped in our tracks and paid close attention to where the sound was coming from. It was coming from our left and sounded close. However, as the bark kept on, we both realized that there was something off about it. I don't know how to put it, but it was almost like somebody was trying to impersonate a dog and doing a very good job at it, but not quite the same. Then, we realized another odd thing about our supposed canine friend. The bark was repetitive, like it was playing on a speaker on repeat. My friend said that something is off and he is genuinely creeped out. And I'm not gonna lie, I was shaking. You might say that it's quite natural to get creeped out in the woods, in the middle of the night, out in the middle of nowhere. But this was different. Every single fiber on our bodies wanted to say, "Get out," but we were scared to move. Finally, I told my friend to run, and quite reluctantly, he obliged. We ran like our lives were depending on it, and still felt like that thing was chasing us. We were out of breath when we found our way back, and my buddy said he heard branches breaking as we were hauling ass out of there, and he was on the very verge of crying hysterically out of pure fear. Strangest thing, however, is the fact that we both live in a country which has nothing to do with America, let alone Native American culture. What do you think was chasing and stalking us back there? Do you have any similar experiences yourself? I live in Utah, more northern, not Navajo Nation, but I'm only about 3 hours from the adamantium Skinwalker Ranch for a reference to how close I am to Skinwalker territory. I live in a neighborhood, so not secluded at all, but it is on the very top of a mountain. Surrounding my neighborhood is just the mountains and nothing else. So basically, just a neighborhood carved into the mountain literally. Only clearings where houses and yards are, very wooded. Anyway, I'm not scared of the forest or even the mountains, and I don't mind being alone. The only thing that worries me is other humans, and cougars sometimes as well. I'm a young girl. I've slept in the mountains a lot with only my dad's dog, or friend even. Sometimes the dark spooks me, but not dark forests or anything like that in particular. I'm pagan and real big into spirituality and connection with nature and the earth. So for the most part, I find comfort exclusively when I'm outdoors. So, when I do feel uneasy or afraid when I'm in nature, I always feel like it's for a good reason. I never ignore it. I usually get home from work pretty late, at around 10:30 at night. This whole drive home, once I come up on the mountain, I was feeling really uneasy, and I was dreading getting out of my car and walking into my house. I have a fear of skinwalkers and entities alike, and I know that attracts them. So I always try and shake those thoughts as soon as they enter my head. But they always do. That night was no different. But I felt like my fear was for a reason. I didn't want to be outside for a second longer, so I just got out of my car and ran back to my door. I was so nervous. It was that horrible feeling where you feel like you look behind you and something horrible will happen. Nothing did, luckily. I locked my doors and went to sleep. The night was normal. In the morning, however, I went outside and there was a bone fragment outside my house near my porch. I'm not saying it was human, probably just animal. It looked like it came from a large bone, but again, it was just a piece. Probably deer? I know I live near coyotes and predators, and there's probably a logical explanation for this. But the bone was dry, not previously removed from something. It was old, no meat, no blood. It was just weird that this showed up overnight, and it wasn't there the day before. I don't have a dog at this house. Just the weird feeling the night before, and then the bone? Creepy. My boyfriend and I were on our way to meet his parents at a campsite last night, up on a small mountain in central Arkansas. It was dark by the time we got up there, and we were traveling down some pretty windy roads through the forest. We start going past a little field area by the side of the road, filled with tall grass, and I saw some eyes reflecting light. Super bright though, almost like they were lights themselves. I've never seen a normal animal's eyes reflect light like this did. It was weird. The grass was pretty tall, so I only really saw the head, but it just looked like some creature literally bouncing through the field. It didn't seem like it had any fur, and I didn't see any ears. It looked like it may have been on 2 feet, because it definitely didn't look like any four-legged animal from its posture. We thought it might have been a deer, but we saw some actual deer a few minutes later, and it looked like nothing like those. They were way smaller, and their eyes weren't reflecting the light like this thing was. I didn't get a super good look because I only saw it for a few seconds, but it was just strange. It wasn't like my brain spent any time trying to figure out what it was, it just immediately went to fear. Like that thing isn't normal, get away. There's also been disappearances in the area that fit the criteria for being skinwalker related. Not really related to this story, but my boyfriend's uncle has seen multiple Sasquatch on this mountain. So there are other cryptids here. Do you think we saw a skinwalker?